Welcome back. In particular, welcome back to GregTech New Horizons. Yes, the series is still going, but despite my better judgment and the frequent admonishment of literally everyone who knows me on a personal level, it's not gone, and it's certainly not forgotten. It's a pity that I can't say that about what I was working on when I left off, but in the meantime, sorting out the ongoing 30 clown car pileup that has deluded itself into thinking it's an ore processing system seems like an excellent substitute for something more directed. Oh, yeah, right. More fusion. That's what I was working on. How could I possibly have forgotten? For those who, like me, have not the foggiest idea what is going on, one of the materials needed to progress into UEV is a fluid called hypogen, which currently can only be produced in a fusion reactor, aka doughnut, aka the things I've been whining about literally since I have started needing to use them back in Louvre tier. For better or worse, until this point I've been able to make do by exploiting the incredible technology known as doughnut stacking, and for all my complaining about them, they haven't been that much of a bottleneck. Until now, because the Carbohydrate Consortium has decreed that hypogen shall require 26 minutes of bagel baking per ingot. This presents what we in America like to refer to as a POTUS issue, because we aren't messing around with major anymore, we're going straight to the top with this one. The solution the game offers, if you're willing to pretend that it is in fact a solution and not just a zero-day patch to prevent people from bricking servers due to an entirely reasonable desire to finish the game before dementia sets in, is the lovely existential misnomer known as a compact fusion reactor. The compact part is a lie. The thing needs 3 chunks of space to build. If you do somehow manage to make one of them, though, it comes equipped with a healthy 64 times parallel capacity, with a perfect overclocking and multiplier to the parallels it offers bonus. And it's also a fair bit cheaper than a comparable amount of regular fusion reactors just on top of it all. You know, if you choose to interpret the word cheap in the same way that the devs interpreted the word compact, which is a naming decision that probably involved enough adult beverages to give a buffalo cirrhosis. So, how do we make one? Well, it's complicated. Really, really complicated. And as is typical with all the projects I do at this point, the real bottleneck isn't the resources, it's the production speed needed to meet the demands of the not quite technically recursive cluster truck that keeps doing drive-bys on me every time I try and do something as audacious as craft a single endgame fidget spinner. I would love to just make my machines faster and call it a day, but I can't because the game won't let me. I would love to just make more machines and run them in parallel, but I can't because linear scaling isn't worth squat anymore unless it comes with a couple orders of magnitude to help the medicine go down, so I am instead stuck, gasp, actually having to do smart things, like optimize my factory design a bit. One of the biggest issues I keep running into is a handful of recipes with time-intensive processing demands stalling out my entire factory, and nowhere is this more prevalent than with my assemblers. Superconducting wire is used in everything from motors to marmalade nowadays, and the blue raspberry flavor in particular takes a full 64 seconds to process, which basically means everything else also takes 64 seconds since it also has to wait on the wire. The obvious Grug Big Brain solution is then to split it off, give it its own massively overclocked assembler that it can clog up all it wants, or 2, just in case I need different flavors, and let everything else crank itself out in the single game tick on the main line that it requires. And yes, for the backseaters out there, I do know how to use a structure builder, I just choose not to, because they're annoying, and they don't quite work right in this version. It turns out, this plan works perfectly once I remember that these machines have 2 modes that you have to cycle between. You love to see it. I likes it when the big numbers go fast. Pity that I won't have that opportunity anymore. And also that this is like one bottleneck of a billion. Bottleneck 2 is the 30 clown car ore processing system. Again, space mining might be a direct upgrade from bees when it comes to bulk material production, but it does come with downsides, and one of those is that you can't really optimize its production for certain kinds of materials that you need a disproportionate amount of. You kind of just shove it in the general direction and then you just get what you get, and if the ore table spread isn't what you were looking for, then you have to filter through a bunch of chaff before you can process the grain, and it isn't always immediately apparent which is which. Case in point, iron ore, which was a very uncommon ore type on my previous configuration, jumped in commonality by multiple orders of magnitude when I switched over to target ruby production, and now it's jamming the entire line with 2.6 million blocks of the stuff. Third on the bottleneck tier list is, finally, making myself a multi-block arc furnace, which should have been done in Louvre tier, and as with many things that should have been done with Louvre tier, I didn't do it. That strategy works great when you only need 100 annealed copper, and it's kind of okay when you need 1,000, but it does tend to struggle a bit when you need several hundreds of thousands, so fine then, I will acknowledge the existence of your 100% original Arc Furnace OC Do Not Steal, and insert yet another edgy box design into my entirely well thought out and reflexively consistent GregTech cinematic universe. And believe it or not, that's all that really has to happen for the fusion reactor, for now, at least. The fusion coils themselves are going to be a nightmare, but that is a problem to tackle later because it's time to do my most favoritist thing ever, which is more bee breeding. Yeah, I totally thought I was done with this, but no, it turns out I was wrong. This time around, I get to breed up the air, fire, water, earth.
Long ago, the four nations lived together in harmony.
Order, chaos, and then finally the nether shard and end shard variants to make me thaumic tinkerer shards. Those shards get mixed together with a bunch of other stuff to make a stack of Icorium blocks. The blocks get slopped into the Kool-Aid basin to pick up a nice rosy glow, and also just like every juice-borne pathogen known to humankind. And then while we wait for 13 bajillion year-long research trains to finish up, we get to do something more productive. Like summoning demons, and then trying to convince them to sign on as organ donors. With a sword. Yeah, if you thought I'd escape the ancient days of nonsense magic mods and cheese tactics by progressing to UHV, you were sorely mistaken. You see, in all of this discussion about Hypogen, this and fusion reactor, that, I've neglected to mention what the stuff is actually made out of. Well, it's a mix of two things. The first is molten Rugnor, which is the grape soda-looking output you get when you combine molten Infinity and molten Quantium in a Tier 4 fusion reactor, because of course it's a fusion recipe. Why wouldn't it be? The second is dragon juice, which presents some issues, because I don't see any dragons around here, and I sure don't see any dragon milking facilities. Now sure, you could just make the Draconic Evolution fusion reactor, because of course it's a fusion reactor. Why wouldn't it be? Make an infernal dragon egg catalyst, and then use that to convert radon, awakened draconium dust, and dragon blood combs into the stuff through the power of concentrated bulk technology, or CBT for short, which is lame and stupid even though it's the only scalable option, but just for a hot second I want to experience the sweet fleeting feeling of getting one up on the devs. So, other than bees, cheese, and stupid recipe that eat dragon eggs to make a few drops of the stuff, is there any other source of dragon blood? Well, yes. From the dragons themselves. When you first go to the end and take that dragon out, you usually get a few stacks of dragon blood nuggets as part of the reward, which is useless at the time, but makes thematic sense, so sure, whatever. Seems useful. If only there was a way to reliably respawn ender dragons in bulk. Most bees just do normal things, like poison you, or set you on fire, or electrocute you. Generally, the relative severity of those effects would not lead me to conclude that I should be concerned about my freshly acquired dragon egg hatching. So, now that I have Chekhov's armory well and truly crammed to the gills... Oh, right. This plan comes with a couple of complications. The first being that spawning dragon bombs in the overworld without any way of containing the resultant lizard eruption is about 20% more destructive than giving a random middle schooler unrestricted world edit permissions on a public server. Hey, I had to learn somehow, right? So we need a way of fixing that. Conveniently, dragons are entities, and thaumic relocators are able to affect just about any movable entity in the game, even ones they really shouldn't, so making a dragon cage with them is pretty simple. It's the second complication that really smothers this idea in the crib, because these are 1.7.10 dragons, which means they are really not supposed to exist outside of the end dimension, and will violently object to this fact by polluting your map with end portals anytime you kill one of them. One end portal is fine. End access doesn't really do anything for me just yet, though there are things that will be relevant for later. But a few hundred of them is decidedly very much less fine, especially since their spawning pattern is non-deterministic, and would brick up any sort of automated dragon farming setup anytime they decide to suddenly excavate a chunk of the floor to make room for a bedrock nerd pole. Add on to this that the egg recovery is buggy and requires some kind of player or pseudo-player interaction with a sword, and you have a combination that firmly belongs to the for memes only bin of goose tech. So anyway, I made a Draconic Evolution fusion machine, which is actually just a fusion stick, ribbed with Icorium for your pleasure. There's like an entire upgrade tree specific to this one machine that I have to progress through before it can do anything other than make upgrades for itself, and I'm not going to get into that because we can't do it yet, and it basically boils down to doing space mining and then throwing Draconic Evolution themed items into the Draconic Evolution reactor until it spits out the blocks we want. It's another one of those machines that only does like 7 recipes and is functionally irrelevant, save for its ability to make dragon juice. And we can't do that, so it'll just sit there. Meanwhile, other progress is still progressing. UEV energy hatches are a thing I can make now, so when I run into applications that really, truly need UEV power for something, that option is available. It's not a good option, mind you, because they need 10-gam to make, and my 10-gam production game is currently floating at preschool squabble levels of weak sauce, but it's no longer strictly impossible, so that is progress. That has progressed. And about the only thing I can see this mattering for in the short term is that it lets me use chromatic glass instead of tiberium in my Naquita fuel recipes, but supporting that transition requires at least 61 UEV laser engravers running nonstop to supply the glass, so let me get back to you on that. We also can make optical circuits now. Oh, happy days! For real, these are the last traditional circuit line in this version of the pact, so this is kind of quite an accomplishment. Woohoo. Confetti goes here. Normally, I would be trying to hyper-invest in scaling their production, since circuits are the biggest bottleneck in everything right now, but each of them requires about 2.3 10-gam dust to make, higher tiers of them need even more, and getting the stack I needed to finish doing the research unlocks for my assembly lines bankrupted my entire supply, so they are not gonna be relevant for a little bit. Unfortunately, that's all the easy stuff out of the way. Now comes the extra exciting part of the video where I upgrade my factory to support UEV production demands without any of the UEV tech that's supposed to go with it. Yay! The name of the game here is Parallelization, which should probably be pronounced Parallelization, but I prefer the former because it sounds so much more traumatic. Basically, with a few exceptions like chemical reactors that have a perfect overclock, my production methods are as efficient as they are ever going to get, and as fast as they can be until I break through the 10-gam problem. Which means, if I want more production, there is one solution. Spam. Spam absolutely everything. You see that component assembly line? Yeah, it's not fast enough. Make 2, they're small. You know what's better than 1 dedicated wetware assembly circuit factory line? Boy, that's a mouthful, say that 5 times fast. 4. 4 of them, running simultaneously. That's 2 circuits a second, for those who are wondering, and yes, I do unironically need that many. In fact, I actually need more, but that's fine, because as with any I can't believe it's not crypto scheme, the only thing going to the moon here is the infrastructure. While we're at it, let's also make a bunch of dedicated advanced assembly lines for the circuits that can't be run through a regular circuit assembly line. This is admittedly less about throughput, which is not a concern at all, and more about me getting sick and tired of having to fix the automation for the things, because the so-called fully automated design that I stole off the wiki claims to be clog-proof, which is extremely false advertising, and having to clean up an explosion on the condiment aisle every time I want to make half a dozen gamer PCs is starting to get mildly vexing. Speaking of gamer PCs, if I can't use optical circuitry, I will need to make a not very fun amount of BioWare circuits to do the job in their place. So let's get 8 bioprocessor assembly lines built up as well. After all, it's not like they won't get used. And with all of the basic production needs nicely snowballed, let's start getting into what I actually wanted to do, which was start work on the massive machine banks that will be needed to propel myself into UEV. First up, laser engravers. My fusion infrastructure is light years away from being able to make industrial quantities of astral titanium, and both chromatic glass and DTPF fuel recipes straight up require them, so I'm going to be getting a little bit too friendly with this machine layout you see right here. Unfortunately, we aren't done there. Building one monument serving physical testament to this world's abandonment of Notch's grace is great and all, but on UHV power it can only produce 1-ish chromatic glass a second, so I made 3 more of them. Fun. That sure looks like a thing I want to have running on my computer. Having successfully monopolized the market on gamer lighting production, I can then proceed with another upgrade I've been wanting to get in the works for a while now, which is switching to chromatic glass-based Naquita Fuel Mark III production. And I understood every word that came out of my mouth just now, and yet somehow it still sounds like gibberish. This glass lets me kick Tiberium to the curb, and the recipe produces twice as much fuel, which are both nice bonuses, but it does come at the cost of needing to run my brand new 64 UEV overclocked laser engravers 24/7, so there's some trade-offs. Trade-offs that are very quickly irrelevant, as I opt to direct that excess of fuel production into 8 more Mark III Naquita fuel reactors, bringing my total supply up to 16 and my total energy output to 3,187 amps of UHV power. Is this necessary? No. Absolutely not. For now. I was doing pretty okay on power before, thanks for asking, but that's not going to be the case for much longer, so yes, actually it was entirely necessary. But not just yet, because getting that compact T4 fusion reactor has hit something of a snag in the form of said astral titanium. Titanium, nay astral, or TNA, depending on how fed up with the game I am at any given moment. The intended method of producing this stuff is via a plasma line, which requires fusion, because of course it does. It also requires fusion of a quantity that I can't sustain, because I don't have enough of it. Because of course I don't. This requirement has resulted in me undergoing unimaginable suffering, and as a result, I am now the disgusted and horrified owner of a compact Tier 3 fusion reactor whose only purpose is to crank out a gross excess of the stuff non-stop in the hopes that it will let my mega alloy blast furnace and laser engravers do literally anything else. This machine, for all of my griping, is insanely effective at solving the whole astral titanium issue. Like, we went from being able to produce a few ingots a minute to a few ingots a second, and as a side benefit, it has solved really every other plasma need I have, save for the Tier 4 stuff that's locked behind the more expensive version. It's so effective, in fact, that I went ahead and started removing all of my existing systems and replacing them with level-maintained compact fusion bills, because no more shall I toil under the tyranny of the donut stack, for I have a new master now. The, bagel bale. Or I guess more accurately, the life preserver lump. Inner tube inundation. I don't know. So anyway, with a functionally inexhaustible supply of TNA finished, I can turn my attention to optimizing other bottlenecks in the production line. We've actually finished most of them now, at least most of the expensive stuff, and the last limiting factor is the fusion coils themselves due to a ridiculously massive number of Labaton crystals needed for their crafting. Well, look at that. A whole 8 multiplexed mixers running in parallel, mixing several million Lapatron precursor dusts. This game sure is easy when you stop caring about good design practices. Which reminds me, we actually have a much better way of doing this now. Welcome one, welcome all to the wonderful world of crafting input buses, also known as, if you're the game at least, achievement.gt.blockmachines.hatch.crafting_input.me.item_only buses, or cribs for short. These fantastic devices are basically just a single block combination of an advanced stocking bus, a subnetted ME storage system, an ME interface, and a linked input bus all rolled into one. Like the subnetted storage and stocking bus combo, they stole all of their crafting recipes in their internal inventory rather than pulling from your ME system for each craft, but in addition to this, they can have their recipes programmed directly with patterns rather than rely on the usual interface design paradigm. They can hold catalysts, lenses, and circuits in an internal inventory separate from their recipes, and to top it all off, they can be linked to another block called a crafting input slave to allow multiple machines to pull from the same internal recipe storage and catalyst setup remotely with no other network required. They're basically just another way of doing what I was already doing with the massive machine parallelization banks, but without the cables, the lag, the throughput bottlenecks that come from using interfaces, and the mess. And my next little bit is going to be spent retrofitting every system that can use them. Their only drawback is that they can't process fluid recipes yet, but we have workarounds for that. So anyway, coils are still taking forever to make, and this time the bottleneck was cutting the chips needed for all the BioWare circuits going into making something. Literally have no idea what it was, but I also don't care because the solution is, as always, just make more of them. Cutting recipes almost always consume a small amount of lube, but I have so much of the stuff that I am literally throwing away more than I keep around now, so rather than mess with my old setup, I can stack them up, pull the lube out of my old recipes, and just keep it in a stocking hatch. With the theory being that if I somehow burn through 2.1 mega buckets of lube without noticing, we have bigger problems than my cutting machines not working. Unfortunately, as I later discover, the lube requirement precludes me from using cribs. Thankfully.
Good night, everybody.
But I can use interfaces pushing into an ME chest/advanced stocking input bus combo to get around the throughput limitation, and the only one who will lag is me, so whatever. Somewhere around this time, or more likely several hours after it when I finally get around to checking my passive system outputs, I finally finished producing all the parts for the 4th tier of my chthonic inner tube incursion, otherwise known as the Tier 4 fusion reactor. In addition to granting access to the vaunted hypogen, this mean green resource donut lets me produce such lovely compounds like fermium, neptunium, rugor, metastable oganescent, and fluorovium, most of which I have absolutely no idea what to do with. I know rugor is a hypogen precursor, and neptunium and fermium plasmas are consumed catalysts in a quantum force transmuter, but the rest of it is just... Either way, huzzah, we have hypogen. Actually, no, we don't, because we still don't have a sustainable supply of dragon juice. My bad. It's my memory, you know? The stupid thing took like 90 hours in-game of crafting, and is personally responsible for over a week of video publishing delay, and I just sort of forgot that it's only one of 2 tasks needed to not progress very much at all. Yeah, gaming. Oh, but no, we're not done. No, we're not done at all. For you see, this was only a prerequisite. And I wish I was joking. No, bulk plasma production was, at best, a side benefit of the real reason I was worrying about getting these, which is fuel. The end goal of the UHV/early UEV/whatever you really want to call this tier is the creation of something called a Dimensionally Transcendent Plasma Forge. As the name suggests, this really overcomplicated and excessively verbose machine forges things that transcend conventional dimensional boundaries with plasma. Sure, creative. But it doesn't just use any old plasma, no, because that would be too easy. It uses different flavors of excited, dimensionally transcendent catalysts, made by mixing a bunch of different kinds of plasma for 2,500 seconds per recipe. And then you shoot it with lasers for another 2,500 seconds. Sure, some of the recipes are under UHV voltage, so I get overclocks, but some of them aren't. And the only other way of making them requires a working plasma forge in the first place. So, I think we all know where this is going. And it's gone! Would you look at that? Which is, in this case, a bank of 64 dedicated mixers and laser engravers, whose single, sole, and only purpose is to produce the catalyst needed to do literally anything with the DTPF. How much does it make, you might wonder? Well, I did the math, and it turns out for the exotic catalyst, which is the highest tier I can make with UHV tech, it produces somewhere on the order hood of 200 millibuckets a second out of raw plasma, period. Not per machine, mind you, total. The entire thing does that. The plasma mixer, in order to craft, requires 2 million millibuckets for the controller block alone. And you thought I was joking when I said 16 actors wasn't going to be overkill on the power production. So, building a DTPF. What do you need? Well, first off, 2,112 awakened draconium coils. The questbook recommends starting with infinity coils if you can, but with all due respect, the cactus can go shove itself. But with all due respect, the questbook was written by a particularly cunning linguist who is far more concerned with writing than they were actually playing the game, and the rather substantial lack of infinity ingot production renders me much more likely to use the draconium ones. Once you have the DTPF up, powered, and fueled, it will only take about 8 hours to make the infinity that way, so no worries. Second off, 2,121 dimensionally transcendent casings, plus a couple hundred for crafting the various other bits and bobs that need it, so call it 2,400 for easy math. I honestly expected this to be more of a problem than it was, but the stuff I ended up making ended up having ingredients with nice flat crafting trees, and compared to the hell that was trying to get all the stupid Lapitron crystals for T4 fusion, this was a breeze. Or at least a not terribly wet fart. Each of them takes 20 seconds to craft, and I can't advanced assembly line the suckers without UIV energy hatches, and I only felt like making one dedicated assembly line for them, so they took 11 hours to craft. But otherwise, a breeze. New Horizons would like to remind you that there is always something you could be doing while your machines are processing. I concur, and from personal experience can say that gainful employment is an excellent way to entertain yourself while your factories are running. Actually, I lied. We do need a second dedicated assembly line, but this one is for the 1280 dimensional injection casings, which look problematically similar to a certain other block that I use in certain other high power applications, and yes, I did just accidentally queue an order for 1280 active transformers, which is both the wrong number of blocks and the wrong block entirely, and I only realized this a good long while after I stopped recording. The recipe for these is somewhat more annoying and convoluted than the Transcendent casing, but I only need half as many, and they take the same 20 seconds per block as the casings, so any bottlenecks that might have been important kind of aren't. They aren't used any further for any recipes, and I won't need that many in the grand scheme of things, and it's not like I'll ever need more than one DTPF, so no worries. Oopsies, so sorry, I lied again. We need a third dedicated assembly line to make dimensional bridges, which are like basically just the base casing, except with a UV wireless energy transfer block wingding in them to make them shiny, and then a bunch of other stuff because reasons. A lot of the crafting items for any given project are pretty much filler at this point, and like, yeah, sure, they sometimes make sense, sort of, but it really feels like the devs just threw in the towel and were like, must expensive for reason, and then just started making everything out of microwaves because nobody had any better ideas. So yeah, those take 8 hours, but again, irrelevant because I have the superpower called being able to leave the game running, and that hard counters really just most of this game. They also require 2 iron singularities each, which comes out to around 16 million iron dust, a demand that seems unreasonable until you realize that I can cash flow that sucker out of the byproducts I get from more useful production lines, and am storing 260 million iron ore because it literally is not worth the time to process anymore. The last ingredient is the controller block itself, which honestly is more of a problem than the entire rest of the machine has been, entirely due to its Tengum requirement. My factory has been cranking out Infinity Catalyst and Tengum from literally every option available to it non-stop this video, and I still had to resort to meteor mining to help speed it along, but after AFKing the requisite 11 hours to craft everything else, and a quick last-second craft to make the superconductor, it ends up being quite achievable. Mind you, that's not to say I'm cooling my heels the whole time this is going on. After all, we haven't finished the exotic catalyst production lines. My current setup can only process roughly 440 millibuckets of resplendent catalyst a second, which is nowhere near enough needed to keep up with the startup cost of a plasma forge before its efficiency boost kicks in, so, I made a second one. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to playing the game on an up-patched version after this challenge is over, because holy cow, I am missing out on quality of life stuff, like machines that scale into the endgame properly, and a life, just in general. Beyond that, though, this thing ends up going together pretty painlessly. Pretty slowly, too, because I found out what was happening here was my schematic was interpolating its design parameters and summoning crafting input buses out of its butt to place them one at a time, but once we run out of those in the ME system, the construction started going down without any problems. And then comes the fun part. Upgrades! Awakened Draconium is great and all, but we are well past the point where it's sufficient, and the next coil material in line is, of course, Infinity. You know, the material that I have been dedicating a not insubstantial amount of my factory towards producing with the singular purpose of getting literally any of it. With the DTPF, this is simplified greatly since we can now convert an infinity comb and a bunch of different catalysts into an ingot's worth of liquid infinity in a single step, which is like a tenth of the cost of the old method. Gotta say, for all my griping, those bees have definitely paid rent, though, because even if some of the species requirements were a tad extra, the efficiency bonus is more than worth it. The DTPF is a quirky beast whose meme automation mechanic is that it slowly starts consuming less catalyst as it's run for longer periods of time, but loses that bonus if it ever stops running or is turned off. I have precisely zero intention of paying attention to this, and all I hear when I see the words 50% reduction is the word of God telling me to make twice as much stuff. Which I'm already doing, because this piece of junk took 11 hours to make. With the rest of my resource needs thoroughly satisfied by dint of having literally nothing else to do while it was crafting, I'm more than ready to start it up. So I do that. Rather too quickly. Turns out the thing really likes overclocking, so slow it down there, Speed Racer. I only have 128 multi-blocks dedicated to making your spicy rainbow burrito juice. You're gonna have to ration it for a bit. Regardless, we now have stable, scalable, and vaguely speedy methods of bulk infinity production, and with that, there is only 2 more Garden of Grind base hurdles to overcome before I can proceed to beat the game as normal. Both of those, along with everything else, however, will have to wait until the next time. Until then, thank you for your time, and I hope you enjoyed.